Hello folks, I'm L.A. Little and this is your weekly NeoTA wrap. We take a look at these markets and we do it from a neoclassical perspective. Each time we ask ourselves what happened last week and what might it tell us about the coming ones. I do this show every Sunday night, broadcast at or before 10 o'clock Eastern Time, archived on YouTube under the channel L.A. Little. You can catch me there anytime, any device. All you got to do is subscribe, get the data pushed to you, or at least the notification. So, last week the markets had a nice week again, with pretty good gains across the indexes. If you look at these gains year to date, Russell back up to its highs, S&P at highs, NASDAQ right at the highs, Dow Jones over the highs as well. So from an index perspective, the Santa Claus rally is in effect and it's pushing on up. A good push last week. This is on top of the big push that had already happened and that we've seen in these indexes over the last 6 weeks or so. So remember, we came off that October 15th low straight up, right? And although it started to climb in this crawl fashion, you have to expect it's going to continue to crawl. And that's because we're in that part of the year where that's what happens if you're in a bullish scenario. And we're definitely in a bullish trend. I mean, I don't know that there's anything else you can call this other than bullish. So over these highs, at new highs, struggling, but it's Christmas time, folks. It's New Year's time. That is the way it works at the end. There is no volume at the end, and typically if you're on a track to move higher, you simply just crawl higher and higher. If you look at the Dow, it's the same picture, doing the same sort of thing. If we move over to what was trailing, it's the NASDAQ. NASDAQ high up here, 4810.86 on the daily. You got up over it, back underneath it. That's a quote-unquote test failure, but you know what? At this point, it just doesn't matter. There's no volume this time of the week. This thing's pushing at the high. It's going to try to get over them again next week. And I say that because it did get over one high already, and you're seeing it get over another one as we speak. Here's the NDX. The high here, 4320. Got as high as 43.22. Again, that's a test failure, but what did this one do? This one got over the breakdown bar, which has been stymieing this now for about 4 days. Gets over it. If it can stay over it tomorrow, I would expect it's going to knock out these highs and make new highs into the end of the year. And I do expect that to actually happen, because if I look over at the Russell pushing after a nice big push up. If you look at it on the weekly, Russell just crossed over and took out this swing point high and this swing point high. It is now at yearly highs. So index wise, I don't see anything, at least not at this point, to even suggest that these markets are going to falter and particularly fail. If we look at the sectors, there are 2 or 3 sectors that are struggling. The IBB, we know last week got hit. That was keeping the index down the beginning of the week. But as the IBB began to crawl back up at the end of the week, it's coming back up to test this breakdown bar. That will be a key test this week. And the price point I'm talking about, of course, is this high on the breakdown bar. That's the one that you have to get back over, and I frankly think that's the one that it will struggle at. If you look at it on the weekly, though, it doesn't look quite that bad. Volume's about the same, just does an inside. I think it made a lower low, not an inside bar. Yeah, slightly lower low, but it did it with slightly less volume. So if anything, you look at this and it says, okay, so it's taking a break. If we look at the 2 weakest sectors, materials is one of them, and this is all based on commodities, and of course the other one is the XLE. But before we flip to it, let's look at the weekly on the XLB. So you can see the breakdown bar here, 49.72. That was back on the first of the second week of December. So that is the area to get back over on the XLB. And if you look at the XLE, this one has already had breakdown bars. It's coming back in to do a retest, regenerate on the weekly time frame. And this is a critical spot for it, because as it tries to get up into this area, and it's already doing the retest regen here, as it tries to get back up and over back into this area, that's going to be very hard to do. And if you look at it back on the weekly, on the daily, if I go back over there, the daily chart, you can already see the retest regenerate is right at the critical price point. Has been now for, what is that, 5 bars it's been trying to get over it. This is the spot where either, this thing comes back down and does some more testing, or finally gets over it and sets up some sort of a range trade. If you think about a range trade, then the range becomes, okay, what's the next set of swing point lows, which would be up here, and you can see them just stacked up here, right? So it could, if it pushes over this, it could come back up, test this high, test this gap area here, right, and test into that zone. That would bring it back up higher on the weekly, which is where you would expect the failure. It would be a range trade on the daily, still a potential bearish retest regenerate on the weekly. And that's a lot of times how these things buy time before they go lower. So XLE, XLB, the two weakest sectors still show the same thing. Now what I would point out to you is if I just flip through on a daily chart here on some of these other sectors, you can see IYT, it's not at the highs. You can see the SOX, not at the highs. Even the XLF is struggling with the highs. And go down the list. XLK can't get to the highs yet. Indexes at the highs, sector's not quite at the highs. If there's a negative to point out this week, it's that. And what you would like to see, if you want to be bullish going into next year, you'd like to see these sectors all making new highs. So that would be something to watch this week when you start thinking about how to position for next week. If we flip over to the OX markets, it's the same story there. We've got the dollar strong, foreign currencies weak. Here's the FXE making new lows. FXY trying to make new lows. The UUP is sitting at the highs. And then if we pop over to the oil market, this is still testing in the lows, right? Doesn't want to give it up because it's come down so far so fast already, but at the same time really having a hard time bouncing. Natural gas did get an under-over, had a little bit more volume. That one's still testing lows. If we look at the gasoline, just as you would expect, at lows. Go over to the bonds. The bonds are trying to come back. Let's pop in here and grab the bonds. Bonds are trying to come back and go back up and test that high. So the bonds doing ABCD structure down, didn't quite finish. I wouldn't be surprised to see them trade a little bit lower this week, but the bonds do look like at some point they're going to try to go back. Go back to the silver market and the metals. Silver still struggling. If I look at gold, gold is still struggling. Yeah, they had big bounces, but this is just a big range trade. And as we've talked about before with the gold market, until we get over this swing point low, that retest, regenerate, that's bearish. And let me draw it out again as we did last week. Until we get over this price point, take out that swing point high, this still looks like a bearish trend, not a bullish one. You have to be careful if you're playing in that space. And let's take a quick look here. The EEM, that's coming back up to do a retest, regenerate, bearish off that low. And then quickly, let's look at the grains. Still can't go anywhere. And if I look at the broad commodities, I suspect I'm going to see even more weakness, which I do. So commodities struggling. Going to continue to struggle probably right up until the end of the year. And I didn't cover, copper, but copper also has broken down here, broken down on the weekly, broken down on the monthly. So a strong push to the downside in pretty much all commodities, which is what reflects that weakness in the XLB and, of course, in the XLE. Something to continue to watch, something that's probably going to take time to develop if they're going lower. But that is potentially an issue as we move into next year, probably, as we get into the year, and I'm talking 2-3 months down the road probably. Okay, let's look. What else is there to tell us? We looked at those. For overseas markets, they look about the same, and most of them were not trading most of the week, so not much to look at there. So when I look at everything, I think about the calendar. You really have no news, no earnings, no economic data until Friday, which is the new year. That says to me, given that the indexes are all at their highs and the sectors are right under them, that you're probably going to see a continue to grind higher to start this week out for the first 2 to 3 days. And then Friday, that's when we'll see, how the players, when they start coming back to work, not so much Friday, but next week, Monday, Tuesday, which is like the 5th and 6th, I believe, next week. Those will be the days that we start seeing people position for whatever's coming. And if you think about that following week, what do you have? You have earnings that are going to start to hit. You have the ECB, which everyone expects to do some sort of quantitative easing, or at least move closer and closer to it. That's going to be the big news week. That's going to be the week that we actually see whatever the big players are going to do. That's when we're going to start seeing it done. And so this week, really just more continuation of what we've seen. The following week, that's the week when we're going to get a better hint of what's coming. And we'll get a good chance, we'll get a good sneak peek of that on Friday when we get PMI numbers around the world, the ISM number here domestically as well, and the first trading day of the new year. We'll get a little bit more volume on that particular day. So kind of a short show tonight, not much else to talk about. It's kind of a shortened week last week. Will be again this week, probably fairly quiet. And then, next week, new year, everything starts over. Everybody starts with a clean slate again. Well, folks, thanks for joining me. That's it for tonight. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one. Good night.